The interesting common fact that surrounded all of their backgrounds was that all of them had wanted to fly.
There has never been in the course of time more inspiring words written than those that read, that all men are created equal. Sadly, for many, these same words proved a hollow promise left to echo in time, resounding as a mockery of an equality that would demand years of struggle, overshadowed by bitter disappointment. Equality was to remain an elusive dream. The dim light of hope never blazed brighter for Black Americans than during an era in American history when they began challenging the discriminatory practices of the armed forces. Key to the demands of major Black organizations, such as the NAACP, the National Urban League, and others, was for the designation of centers where Negroes could be trained for work in all branches of the Aviation Corps. It was not enough to train pilots alone, but navigators, bombardiers, gunners, radio men, and even mechanics. Under this collective pressure, Congress made concessions by passing Public Law 18. Under its directive, an air school to prepare blacks for military service was authorized. 91 of the 100 young Negro college students enrolled in the civilian pilot training program qualified for civil licenses during 1939 and 1940. In spite of all these facts, the Army Air Corps refused to alter its stand and allow blacks to fly. In 1941, with guidance from the NAACP, a Howard University student named Yancey Williams filed suit against the War Department to compel his admission to an air training center. Almost immediately, the War Department responded by announcing that it would establish an air unit near Tuskegee Institute, Alabama, the 99th Pursuit Squadron. Activated March 21st, 1941, the Fighting 99th began training ground support troops at Chanute Field, Illinois. Eager young Black Americans received specialized training in maintenance engineering, armament, and communications. Just a few months later, an inaugural address was given at the Tuskegee Institute, initiating the training of Black aviators for the United States Army Air Corps. This hard-fought privilege brought with it a great responsibility. The nation was watching, and the fate of future Black military aviation rested in the hands of these intrepid young flyers. In a bold and inspiring departure from the expected, the contract for construction of Tuskegee Army Airfield was awarded to the firm of McKissick & McKissick, headed by a Black architect and engineer. In July, construction began on the facility for basic and advanced flying training. The first class for pilots consisted of 12 cadets and 1 military officer, Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. It commenced primary flying training July 19th, 1941 at Moulton Field. Soon, young Tuskegee graduates would show the world they could not only fly, but fight. Shortly after graduating in the first class of 1942, Second Lieutenant Charles DeBow was stopped on the street by a white civilian and asked, "You one of those new colored flyers over at Tuskegee?" He proudly answered that he was. "Tell me one thing, what do you boys want to fly for anyhow?" he was asked. Shocked but not surprised, DeBow said he couldn't really think of an adequate answer at the time, but afterward realized the simple elegance of his answer. He was flying for his country. He felt he had a job to do for his country and his race. And just as Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver had proven themselves as educator and scientist, he might prove to someone that Negroes could become good pilots and officers. Armed only with their bravery and determination, fueled by dreams of dignity for others like themselves, Lieutenant DeBow and 4 of his fellow pioneers, Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., Second Lieutenant Lemuel R. Custis, Second Lieutenant George S. Roberts, and Second Lieutenant Mac Ross, became the first graduates paving the way for the other 961 black military aviators who were trained at Tuskegee Army Airfield during World War II. Under the command of Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., 450 of the graduates served as fighter pilots, attaining dignity and glory in the aerial war over North Africa, Sicily, and Europe. Flying P-40s, P-39s, P-47s, and P-51 type aircraft, the 99th Squadron became the 332nd Fighter Group, which also included the 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons. Together, they flew 15,553 sorties and completed 1,578 missions with the 12th Tactical U.S. Army Air Force and the 15th Strategic U.S. Army Air Force. And with each and every mission, yet another victory was achieved, not just for the nation, but for a people as well.
The interesting common fact that surrounded all of their backgrounds was that all of them had wanted to fly. Well, I started out with these young people back in a black Air Force in Europe in World War II. Performance is the absolute key in combat. To protect the bombers, to prevent them from getting shot down by enemy fighters, the 99th Pursuit Squadron was an expert in dropping bombs and hitting targets and hitting locomotives. It was also an expert in aerial combat. The 99th Squadron did one thing at Anzio that no other squadron did. It shot down 16 enemy airplanes.
Yesterday, I fulfilled one of my ambitions as a combat pilot. I got one airplane.
This was my country. I wanted a piece of it. I had to fight for it, but I'll be damned if I was going to let some other country come in and take it over.
Though no real plans had been made for their usage, by mid-1943, Negro candidates were being screened to determine their relative aptitude as pilots for multi-engine aircraft, as well as bombardiers and navigators. Class 43J was the first at Tuskegee, with about half of its members training in the multi-engine Beechcraft AT-10, hoping that the bomb group program would actually develop. The first air cadets to train outside Tuskegee were the navigators who graduated at Hondo Field, Texas, February 26, 1944. The 477th Bombardment Group was officially activated January 15, 1944 at Selfridge Field. Although the 477th never entered combat due to the war's end, their struggle for equality and performance as military professionals, along with the magnificent wartime record of the 99th and 332nd, led to a reversal of the U.S. War Department's racial policies. In 1946, Tuskegee Army Airfield closed. Shortly after its closing, the former base commander, Colonel Noel Parrish, in discussing the success of the flying school, said the following: "How good were our pilots? How good is any pilot? Our men were good enough to graduate from any flying school in the country. We made sure of that. And working together, we proved it. We emphasized that a pilot or a man of whatever color, size, or shape is just as good as he proves himself to be. Men and pilots have to be considered as individuals. We have had some of the worst pilots in the world right here, and we have had some of the best. In the first place, they flew and fought as men. They may have had pretty good alibis for being failures if they wanted to use these alibis. Or they may have been proud of their group as the only one like it in the world, as they had a right to be. But when the test came, they had to fly and fight just as men. Americans against a common enemy. Today, there are over 425,000 Black Americans serving in the armed forces as an integral part of the defense of this great nation. Their position in the military, their communities, and indeed the world has been attained and preserved through achievement and honor, the direct result of commitment to their ideals and dedication to their dreams.
In the early days at Tuskegee, in addition to the already difficult job of flying, we trained under the additional pressures of segregation, but we had no time for self-pity or despair. We were too busy preparing ourselves for a career of service to our nation. The state of our fully integrated Air Force today is a pretty good indication that we did a good job. But that doesn't mean that the future will be a rose garden, or that there will not be other obstacles to overcome. Freedom must be repurchased by every new generation. When the Tuskegee flying program was offered to America's black youngsters, we were ready. We had prepared ourselves for this opportunity, and when it presented itself, we grabbed it with both hands. Prepare yourself so that when your Tuskegee appears, you will be ready.
Must have been cold there in my shadow to never have sunlight on your face. You were content to let me shine, that's your way. You always walked a step behind. Well, I was the one with all the glory, while you were the one with all the strength. A beautiful face without a name for so long. A beautiful smile to hide the pain. Did you ever know you're my hero? You're everything I wish I could be. And I can fly higher than an eagle, because you are the wind beneath my wings.
Freedom must be repurchased by every new generation. Prepare yourself so that when your Tuskegee appears, you will be ready.
It's really a pleasure. And I always feel humbled to have been asked to tell about the Tuskegee Airmen. Especially when it's a group that's near my age, like I was 65 years ago. Because it sets the stage. First, I might say, my next birthday, I'll be 89 years old. And I was going to say, looking out at this audience, the time that I'm going to talk about was when I was just a year or two older than you are now. Yes, I was 18 and 19 and 20. I often say in jest, had I known I was going to survive and live so long, I'd have took better care of myself. But anyway, the time that I'm talking about was the era between 1940 and 1946 or 1947. And I had graduated from the Edward F. Searles High School in Methuen in 1939. And I had an industrious mother and father that worked hard and kept trying to beat it into this guy's brain that I should go to college. And in 1940, I went off to college in South Carolina, an all-black co-ed college that my father knew about. And it was during that first year that the United States joined England and Canada and Australia and the Russians and formed the Allied component against Germany and Japan and later Italy. And that was during my freshman year in college. And of course, they had a draft going on, and I was of draft age. And I went up to the old Methuen Town Hall that's on Broadway, and I signed up for the draft, and I was classified 1A. That meant that I got a number, and it wasn't going to be too long before they were going to call me up and stick me in the Army. But in the meantime, I was down there in college. And what was happening is I was getting another kind of education. I'm not going to go through what was going on. I hope your schools have taught you something about racism and segregation and discrimination. And I hope that you know something about it, and it was wide and handsome and rampant when I got down there. And most of the students that were at the college were the children of families that lived in the South. And the shocking stories that I was hearing from my classmates was enough to make me want to come home. But as a dutiful son, I can tell you the truth now. I wasn't about to come home because I didn't want to listen to my father's mouth, because I was afraid of him, and he was the law, and he was paying the freight. So I stayed in college. But nevertheless, they started taking some of the older boys off the campus and putting them in the draft. And it was during that year that they began to send soldiers overseas to England. And we'd already declared war against Japan, but that was mostly Navy. And so coming back on the campus was some of the seniors and the juniors, and I was only a freshman. And we would talk, and they would say they're on furlough and they're going to go overseas. And all I could think about was, you go overseas, and for some reason or other, you don't come back. I was just an 18-year-old kid, and that's the way I thought, that you go overseas and you don't come back. So I spent a miserable freshman year, and I came back home and spent that summer working in the mill. The mills were boom time at that time, making cloth for the military. And I got hired to work the summer, and I went back to college that next. And by now, they were getting close to picking me up, because they were getting close to drafting the guys of my age. And this deep, dark secret that was going to last for about 40 or 50 years was going to happen. And this is the secret that I wanted to talk to you about, that I represent today. The military and the Congress at that time, in the early 40s, the late 39s and the early 40s, through Franklin Roosevelt, had decided to build up the military. And the only place they had, because of the racist situation, the only places they had for African Americans at that time was menial jobs as privates, if it was the Army. And if you got drafted into the Navy, you worked below deck. You swabbed the deck and you worked below deck in the kitchens. It didn't make no difference whether you were a black college graduate or a black PhD or a black doctor or a black lawyer. You were drafted as a private or a third-class seaman in the Navy and given a service-type job. That's what we faced at that time. Because this great Congress of ours and the military were decided that that's all we could handle. So a brouhaha started in this country. And I'm not going to take up all your time and tell you about what happened. But the NAACP got into it, and some liberal congressmen to dispute that they should give little black kids the chance to see if they could fly planes, and they wound up with a compromise after about a year. So they decided to make this deep, dark secret an experiment of a few black African Americans in a God-forsaken town in Alabama, deep in the South, where they could hide us. Now, I tell you that because no newspapers were allowed, no reporters were allowed. And once we got there, they used to inspect our lockers. And history will tell you that we had 5 or 6 live and thriving, they call on, at that time, colored newspapers, namely like the Chicago Defender, the Afro-American, the Pittsburgh Courier, the New York Amsterdam News, and the St. Louis Call, who were raising the dickens with the military and Congress about how they were treating us. But because they didn't want the nation, the people in the nation, to know what was going on, what we knew was they banned all newspapers on the air bases. And if you were a cadet and your family had sent a newspaper to you, they'd haul you out at 6 o'clock in the morning for inspection, and they'd go through your stuff in the barracks, and if they found one of those newspapers, you were now no more cadet, but taken into the regular army. There was no communication between you and your family and your relatives except censored letters. That's what we had to go through. Censored letters. So much so that I digress a little bit, and I used to send my mother's letters, and I'd forget that we weren't supposed to put certain things in the letters when you wrote them home. And I have in my possession that after my mother died, I went down cellar and found this trunk where she saved all of this stuff. And there was these letters with certain things deducted out, whatever, something that I had mentioned, like some town or some name or whatever. So they would unseal the letters and scratch out what they didn't want your parents to know, and then seal it back up and let it go. But that's the kind of thing that we were under. But I got a little ahead of myself, and let's get back to the time I'm on that campus. And it's now 1943, and they ain't got to me yet, but it won't be long. And the turning point in my life happened on a Sunday in October of 1943. And we had just come out of the mess hall. And we're sitting around on the campus. And this little African-American guy, about 21 or 22 years old in a uniform, got out of a cab and he come up on the campus. And he had a khaki uniform and he had second lieutenant bars on his shoulders. And he had wings on his shirt lapel. And a bunch of us crowded around him. And as we talked to him, we found out that he had just graduated from Tuskegee Air Base. I say that and quit because of the fact that I had never even heard about Tuskegee. He had graduated from a military school in Tuskegee, Alabama. And they'd given him 30 days to come home, and he was going to go up to Detroit to take combat training. And the reason he was on the base was because of the fact that he had a girlfriend that went to this college, and she lived from a town about 25 miles away from the school. And he had gone to the town and they had told him that she was up at the school. So he came to the school. So in questioning him, he said that the best thing he could tell us was that we had to be appointed by Washington, by the Adjutant General's office. But maybe if we went to a recruiting station, they could give us some information. So I figured maybe this was my way out. But little did I know that I was going to run into this racism and discrimination. I'm a 19-year-old kid, and I'm 1,400 miles away from home, and I'm scared as hell. And I don't want to be where I am anyway. And the truth be told, I don't want to go in the Army either. But anyway, that Monday morning, I went downtown to the recruiting station. And every time I tell this, I always feel like I could jump out of my skin, because it's 65 years later. And I can see them three goons that came at me when I was about 18 going on 19 and calling me all kinds of names. just because I had walked into a recruiting station and said I wanted to go to flying school. And there was these 5 guys from the Marines and the Army and the Navy, and they're all in uniform, and they all but attacked me. So much so that I ran out of the recruiting station, and I ran back to the campus, and I can remember jumping in the bed and covering up my head. And for some reason or other, I fell asleep. But I woke up, and it was in the afternoon, and I was courting a girl. I was courting this girl who lives down in town, and I went down to her house, and she wasn't home. She was working after school, and I talked to her mother. And her mother worked for the chief game warden of the state of South Carolina. She was the cook, and now I fell into luck. And she said when she went to work the next day, she talked to her boss, and maybe he could tell her. So sure enough, he sent his chauffeur to pick me up, and he took me the next morning to Fort Jackson, about 20 miles from Columbia, South Carolina. And that's where I got the application to send to Washington. But I tell that story because if you followed me, if you had to bet on whether I'd ever get to Tuskegee by me telling you that, you certainly would lose your money. Because there was a hell of a lot of eligible young boys that went through the same kind of thing but weren't as lucky as I was. Because I got an application and I sent it to Washington and it came back to me. And I took the written exam at Fort Jackson and I took the medical exam at Fort Jackson. But there again, I'll tell you another story. They sent me from there to Fort Bragg to take basic training. And while I was there, Tuskegee called and said, send me down to Tuskegee. And I'll never forget. I'm there at Fort Bragg and in the mess hall during the lunchtime, and this major came up to me and said, we got good luck. You're going to Tuskegee this afternoon. Now I'm on this great big old base, Fort Bragg, with about 50,000 soldiers. I don't even know where I am, except if you ask me where are you, I'm at Fort Bragg. So he came to my barracks and we picked up our duffel bag, my duffel bag, and he took me to the railroad station and he handed me 2 envelopes and he said, this one is your traveling orders, don't open it. And he said, now this one here is your tickets for the railroad, plus your meals, because you're going to be on the train for 2 full days and 2 full nights. And I said, okay. So not long after, this train pulls in, and he taps me on the shoulder, and he's got a major with him, and they said, happy flying, and I'm happy. And the steps fold down, and this big white guy in uniform, he's the conductor. And I went to get up on it, and he pushed me back, and I fell back into the offices. He said, no niggers get on my train. Do you want me to repeat that? That's what that white conductor told me. So this major picked me up and turned me over to the guy he was with, a captain, and said, let's go, I'm going down here. So he went down to the office and he talked to the station master. And he had those 2 envelopes, and they were government issue. And the station master came and told the conductor to get on the train. And he took the 2 envelopes. And maybe about 15 minutes after that, they all got off the train, and the major says to me, these are government orders. You'll travel on this train, and you'll have no more trouble. I just often wondered what would have happened had I been alone. What would have happened? But anyway, he put me on the train with my tickets, my meal tickets, and my train tickets. That was the way we traveled in those days. And when I got on the train, this black Pullman porter put his arms around me and said, I'm going to take care of you for 2 days and 2 nights. So he took me to the coach. And he said, you're going to travel in style. He said, one night you can sleep in the lower berth, and tomorrow night you can sleep in the upper berth, because you got both of them. And he said, there's nothing but white people on this train, and none of them want to sleep with you. So sure enough, I had the upper and the lower to myself for 2 whole days. But I only tell you that to tell you, getting to Tuskegee wasn't easy. Most of us are dead today, but if you were to come to one of our conventions, every one of us have the same kind of story to tell. Like, for instance, comes to mind about, I had gotten my commission. I had gone to Detroit and become an instructor, and I was sent to Florida, to Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City, Florida. And there was like 20 of us in that one class. Exactly, there were 23 black lieutenants in the class. And coming out of the 5 and 10 is these 3 big white guys, and he came directly to us and took both of us and threw us in the gutter and told us that no blacks walk on the sidewalk where they walk. You'll walk in the gutter. So Dunklin looked at me and I looked at him, and it was as though we had given each other a message. Now, I don't know what the 100-meter dash record is, but both of us broke that record that morning getting back to the base. And if you were to ask me, I would just look at you and not answer, did you ever go up to the main street in the city again? Like hell. But those are the kind of treatment that we're getting. They disregarded the fact that I had a government officer's uniform, and I had wings, and I had bars. It didn't mean anything. But those are the kind of things I could tell you and spend a lot more time. But anyway, I'm going to tell you one more instance. I had been commissioned now a couple of years, and I had been assigned, me and 3 other guys had been assigned to Midland, Texas. You got a former president, he's got a ranch about 20 miles from there. But he wasn't born then. I'm talking about former President Bush. But we were at Midland Field, and there was 4 of us. And that's when the Chinese Air Force was born. And we were sent there as bombardier instructors. And it was just 4 of us, plus about 300 white officers, pilots, bombardiers, and navigators. And we lived in a barracks that held 64 officers, just the 4 of us. And we ate our meals in the enlisted man's club. And they had this big, white, beautiful country club building where the white officers ate. But it was off limits to us. And we were doing the same thing that all the other guys were doing. But that's the way we were treated. We weren't recognized on the same par with the white flying officers. I don't know whether you want to hear any more about it or not, but I often say it's a hell of a lot better today than it used to be. We had the civil rights marches after that, and then a lot of my buddies had been wing commanders in the Air Force. They had become squadron leaders because they stayed in the service behind the integration, and they had become graduates of the Air War College in Washington. We had gone overseas and then were recognized by our white buddies. And these white buddies that we protected had become generals and high officials in the Pentagon. And they knew who we were, because we had saved some of their lives. And then the documentary directors got into it and began making documentaries. And TV got into it and began to make DVDs and VHS tapes of us. And then in 1995, they made the movie, The Tuskegee Airman. And then the people started saying, who the hell were they? The secret was out. The secret was out. And then 3 years ago, Congress voted because they said we had fought 2 wars We had fought a war against the United States to go to war for the United States, and fought another war overseas to keep the same ones that didn't want us to fight, to keep them safe. And because of that, they were gracious enough to invite us to Washington 2 years ago. And they kept us there for 3 days. And President Bush, in the rotunda on March 29th, gave 130 of us that could make it the highest award that can be given, the Congressional Gold Medal.
People, if you have a question, if you would come near down to here so you can ask a question, we give you the microphone, please.
How was your first flight, if you did?
You want to ask a question?
Yes. How was your first flight?
How's that?
How was your first flight?
It's a good thing they have a compass cover in the primary plane that I took my first flight. You know what a compass cover is? You know what a compass is?
Yes.
Well, in the first plane that you learn how to fly in, you're in the front, and the instructor's in the back. And right beside you is a metal cup that fits over the compass. And the compass is about 6 inches in radius. And it has a cover over it, but it's metal. And that's what you use when you can't hold your breakfast, because you're going to certainly need it. And so that's how my first flight was.
Thank you.
Do you have any regrets?
Too loud, I can't hear.
Do you have any regrets? Do you have any regrets?
Do I have any regrets?
Yes.
I hope by the time I got to this age, and what I've learned for 65 years since that happened, that I can truthfully say that all the emotional turmoil that I went through and suffered through, that the benefits to others, like you learning about it today, is well worth it. It's well worth it.
Okay.
You know, what kind of value in money can you put on the experience that I have to offer? How much? Impossible to buy it. For 20 years, I've been going into schools and Greek organizations at their luncheons and universities all over New England, and air bases and Navy bases, telling them about what happened to me. And the feedback has been tremendous. That's why I say it's a privilege for me to have been a part of that outfit, of which there's only a tenth of us left. There's less than 100 out of 1,000. There was 996 of us that got commissioned. And there's less than 100 living today. And I represent the 14,000 blacks that made up the all-black Air Force. So the answer is, if I knew that this was going to happen, I'd have been a better flyer and student than I was.
I'm right now enlisted in the Army, 3 years active duty. I wanted to ask if you had any advice for me as a minority.
Well, my wisdom would tell me that sum it up and to keep it simple, that I would say to youngsters and college kids, to be wary of people advising you as to your worth, to your worth. Strive to progress in your life as much as possible and establish to yourself your worth. We were told by a bunch of honkies there in Washington that we couldn't fly. And they didn't know any one of us. How could they describe our worth and they didn't know any of us? They had their own peculiar prejudiced notion. In your life today, people, and it's done all the way, people have you put in categories, and because you're this, you ain't worth that, whatever that is. So you try to progress in your own life to do the best you can and get to be worth something to you and your close loved ones. And describe yourself and not be described by other people. Since it's me talking, I'll tell you about my high school days. I graduated from the Edward F. Searles High School, and there were only 3 blacks in that high school when I was there. I'm talking about in Methuen. But I was vice president of the class for 3 years. I played on the track, I ran on the track team, and I was captain 2 years. Now, to finish that up, some stupid guy in Washington is going to say, see Luther McIlwain, he's a black. He'll never learn how to fly. Do you understand what I'm trying to say now? He
Yes.
didn't know me. He didn't know my qualifications. All he knew was I was an African American, and he was biased against the whole bunch. So he said we couldn't fly. And once I was taught, I was one of the best.
Thank you.
That's why I say don't let other people describe you. Okay.
Hi, my name is Ana Garcia. I'm a senior. I'm in JRTC. I just wanted to ask you that if you're happy that you went up and above your friends, and if you're proud of your accomplishments of your goals in life that you have done.
I didn't understand you.
I'm gonna repeat myself. My name is Ana Garcia. I'm a senior in JROTC. My question for you is, are you happy that you went up and above your friends in your accomplishments in life and your goals?
You know, the best way I can answer that is with the accomplishments that I have on my resume, I'm astounded. I'm astounded.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Darren Castillo, and I want to know, what did you feel every time you took down an enemy airplane? I want to know, what did you feel every time you took down an enemy airplane?
I have difficulty understanding.
What it felt like every time you took an enemy airplane?
I think he's trying. I think he's trying to ask what it felt like when you were in the air and you shot down enemy planes.
I have no experience in shooting down any plane. Is that what you asked? I have I can't tell you because of the fact that I didn't shoot down it.
Thank you.
Hi. Damn. Hi, I'm James. My question is, why did you choose the Air Force over any other branch of the military?
Let me go over something that maybe you missed the point. In those days, when they drafted you, you became a private and a laborer. That's in the Army. If they drafted you and put you in the Navy, they put you below deck, and you worked below deck. Here comes a guy, a young Air Corps guy that's got wings and is now qualified to fly fighter planes. Would you rather be a flyer? You got to go into service somewhere. Or would you rather work on the docks and load ammunition on a ship? Which would you rather do?
Fly.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
How do you feel now that we have a black president?
You have to repeat it because
How do you feel that we have a black president?
I'm here to talk about the Tuskegee Airmen, not politics. But you know, let me tell you something. Since you asked that kind of question, in 1990, now you got to read history and know that in 1948, President Truman took a look at our record overseas and said, no more of that. We're going to integrate the military service. Is that right? 1948. Because when he found out what we had done overseas, he said, enough is enough. No more separate but equal. We'll integrate the armed services. Okay? Years later, in 1990, we had our convention of the Tuskegee Airmen in Boston at that big hotel there across from the Prudential. And one of the guest speakers was Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell. And Colin Powell, in his address, wanted us to know that he was the highest ranking military person in this country. Okay? Appointed by the first President Bush. Now he's there with us, and here's what he said. And I got the speech to prove it. Here's what he said. He said, today I am the highest ranking military officer in the United States of America. But if between 1942 and 1946, the Tuskegee Airmen hadn't performed like they performed, there'll be no General Powell.
Hello. My name is Javanette, and I'm a senior in PFA. And my question was, if flying was a scary experience for you.
You know, can you try it?
Was flying a scary experience for you?
You want to know about my flying experience?
Yeah.
She wants to know if it was a scary experience for you. Was the flying scary?
A scary experience?
Yeah.
The scariest experience that I ever had.
Shh. I'm sorry, we missed it. Could you say that one more time? We missed it.
I'm going to give you the scariest experience I ever had. There was two of us. And we were flying what they call a dog leg. And a dog leg is like a triangle. If you know what I mean by a triangle. Yeah. You leave here, and you go out over here, and you turn from here, and you go down here, and you come back where you started. This is in Texas. And if you know anything about Texas, there's a Guadalupe Pass, and it runs along Texas and New Mexico and into Mexico near Juarez. Those are mountains about 8,000 feet high, and the river is 8,000 feet down. And as I made my turn on the second leg to come back to San Antonio, an oil pressure line burst. And now I'm at like 9,000 feet, and I'm losing altitude and have no oil pressure. But when I look, I'm in the pass, and the mountains are on both sides of me, about 1,000 feet, and I'm down in the pass, and underneath me is nothing but high trees and a river. And I've got almost 100 miles to go. But I can't go up, and I can't go to either side. So I'm losing altitude and hoping that I can get to the end of the pass before I get to the river, because I'm losing altitude. That's about the scariest that I've ever been, because of the fact that I had no control over the plane so far as up and down is concerned. It was in a glide path. What happened was I struck luck and came to an opening between the mountains as we were going down, and there was an opening between the mountains. And I landed in some bushes and small trees. The plane was devastated, and he and I were injured, but that's all. If I don't find that, I would have had to ditch the plane in the river, and God knows what would have happened. Probably 3 or 4 days before they even found us. But that's the scariest. Of course, you say how scary. It took about an hour for that to happen. About an hour.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello. What was the biggest challenge you had to face in life?
Would you try to repeat that so that I...
What was the biggest challenge you had to face in life?
Was the best time I ever had?
Biggest challenge. Yeah.
Your greatest challenge in life. Challenge.
The greatest challenge? The determination to get wings. Because of all the obstacles that kept being thrown at us at unexpected times, that challenge of getting wings, I consider it the greatest challenge because of the relief once I got commissioned. The stress was off me now. But it took 18 months to get a commission. And it was always throwing something at us. And the only way you can measure how great the challenge was the relief after you got commissioned. Now, at least I got a commission. It didn't mean much, but that was the goal, to learn how to fly and get a commission.
Luther, I want to thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for you to come and visit us today. We have a presentation from Mr. Charles. Gene, would you come up, please?
On behalf of BMF and the JRTC, we would like to present you a small token of our gratitude.
Thank you. I hope that each and every one of you hear this. I really appreciate this to the bottom of my heart. But what I want you to take with you is the fact that my reward is each and every one of you being here and being such a great audience. I want to thank you very much.